You've probably always thought that if you sing in a group, it's all about the music, right? It's got to be. That's what you're doing, so it must be about music. Well, I think you're wrong, and even though I've been leading group singing since I was 20 years old, and by the way, I'm now 47, so that's a long time, it wasn't until a few years ago that I realised that getting large numbers of people to sing together, whether it's 20, 10, or 300, and I've done all of those numbers and in between, it's not about the music. It's about something much deeper than that. And it took me until the pandemic to realise it. So I've run community choirs for more than 25 years. That means people who usually wouldn't consider themselves professional singers, but just like to sing. You like to sing, they like to sing. Most people just like to have a sing. Now, for some people, that's in the car, in the shower, and it's usually within the confines of their own space. Nobody else is there, because most people get really worried about what other people will think if they hear your voice, because your voice is you, right? I always say that your voice, your singing voice particularly, but also your speaking voice, people who get nervous about hearing their voice on camera or on voicemails or on camera for videos for social media, they get really nervous about that. But I always say your singing voice in particular, it's the most naked thing you can do other than get naked. And just to be clear, this video is definitely not about getting you naked. What it is about, though, is what happens when we sing, particularly in a group. And as I said at the start of this video, it's not about the music, at least not about the music first. If you enjoy my content, please do give this video a like and a cheeky subscribe. Stick around for more content on the connection between music and mental health and well-being. So I promised you I'd tell you what it is that singing in a group is about if it's not about the music. And I'm going to tell you a story about what happened at the start of the pandemic. So, had you been in my world at the start of the pandemic, you would have found me trying to keep community choirs going when everyone was sat at home. Most people didn't know how to use Zoom. And of course, we have the technological constraints of trying to use Zoom calls to get masses of people singing. So I was looking at groups of more than 100 people. And of course, everyone's internet speed, everyone's internet's connection is different. Not everyone has great tech setups. And so if you leave everyone unmuted, they are not going to sound great. It was potential catastrophe. So of course, what we were faced with is they could only hear themselves singing. They had their microphone on mute. Whatever I played them down the call as the host of the call, that's what they would sing along to. So they could see each other singing along, but they couldn't hear each other singing. They could only hear, I could record multiple layers of voices. They could sing along to those voices. So they had other voices to sing along to, but they couldn't hear the choir. Now, in that situation, had you asked me about that before the pandemic, I would have said, this is just going to be not useless, not pointless, but not far off. It was a choir without the music. And yet, when you looked at people on the screen, so many people were crying. They were still moved by the experience. Now, of course, there will have been an element of the fact that this was in the face of adversity. Lots of people were worried about what was going to happen. The pandemic was a worrying time. Lots of stress in the air. So perhaps that was feeding into it, the emotion of the situation. But the more I watched these weekly rehearsals take place, and the more that I watched everyone's reaction, I realised that singing as a group is not, most importantly, about music. It's about human connection. It's about the shared experience. It's about the community element. It's about feeling connected to someone else and you're sharing in the moment. And that has really fed into now what I talk about when I go into businesses and run singing workshops and get conferences singing, about this power of human connection in singing. Now, that was only really a follow-on from what had happened a few years before that, as I'd started to become fascinated by what happens if you ask people who have any kind of musical hobby. So for me, that was piano clients and community choirs, but you could replace that piano with any other instrument as you could with the choirs. When you say to those people, why do you have this hobby? What do you get out of it? The first answer is almost always nothing to do with music. And there was that theme again. Musical hobbies are often not primarily about music. If you ask someone, perhaps you know someone who is in a choir who plays an instrument as an adult just for fun, why they have that hobby, they often say things like this. It gets me out of the house. I have a small circle of friends. I wanted new friends. I have a stressful life at home or in my business, and I needed some time just for me. I don't get some time that's just for me very much. I need some space. I need some creative outlet. They often talk about the fact that somebody at school told them they'd never be musical, and that's really affected their confidence. People talk about being just generally an anxious person or low on confidence. They never thought they'd be able to stand on a stage or perform in any way. And I've started to become really fascinated about how the music is something that is facilitating that. They're talking about something that is a well-being based answer. The fact that they've chosen a musical hobby to fulfill that hole in their life is the same method and same thought process as when other people choose to take up yoga or running or start joining a gym or whatever it might be. For these people, music is fulfilling that well-being shaped role. And I started to get really fascinated about how musical hobbies, and particularly in the subject of this video, group singing is not about music. It's about so much more than that. They're just using, or we're just using, if I facilitate it, we're using music to facilitate that human connection. So here are some really powerful things that you can learn about that for you, but also if you're running a business or you're involved in the management of a business. Here are some things that group singing can tell us that are really powerful. 1, when you have group singing, every single voice in that scenario is worth the same. There are no leaders and followers. There's no management structure. There's no hierarchy. Everyone's voice is worth the same. And that is a really powerful tool. Isn't that the absolute ideal when it comes to teamwork? When it comes to communication and group work and coming together and connection. We want everyone's voice to be worth the same. And group singing and choirs does that beautifully. 2, you have a shared goal. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody in a group singing situation wants it to sound as good as possible. Nobody's agenda gets to be imprinted upon anyone else's. Everyone wants the same thing, and everyone's voice is worth the same thing. They are 2 really powerful examples of what happens when you have a group singing thing and how that is the perfect demonstration of an ideal teamwork situation. There's a cultural and societal studies concept called imagined community. It's by a guy called Benedict Anderson. I'll post a link in the description about Benedict Anderson's group on imagined community. What it says is when communities or groups of people come together, often they imagine themselves to have something shared, to have similar characteristics, to be the same kind of people. So if you think about a football crowd, for example, if you have 50,000 people in a stadium who all support the same team and they're all singing, they all believe themselves to be the same. So in my case, I'm a Newcastle United fan. You've got 50,000 Newcastle fans in St James's Park in Newcastle singing a song about supporting Newcastle United. We at that point think of ourselves as Newcastle United supporters. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is where we're from. It's an imagined community. It's not necessarily a factual thing, because the reality is within that crowd there will be many people who have different beliefs, different politics, different religions, different societal thought processes, morals, jobs, characteristics, personalities. Those people are very different people, but in the moment that they're singing together, they all believe they are of the same imagined community, even without thinking about it. All their voices are equally important. There isn't a hierarchy there, and everyone has the same shared goal. They all want to, in that case, support Newcastle United, raise the atmosphere, try and spur them on to victory. Group singing in that situation isn't necessarily about the music, because frankly, most people in a football crowd are not usually great singers, but they are worth the same. Everyone's voice is the same, and they all have the same goal. They all believe they belong to the same imagined community. So I promise you in the title of this video, how can this all help a business that you're running? If you have a team of people and you want to give them a great demonstration about teamwork and communication and connection, group singing is one of the best ways you can do that. And not only will it show teamwork and communication and give them a great demonstration of connection, but vulnerability. Pushing them outside their comfort zones, getting them to sing in front of each other, I said before, is a very naked thing to do. The sound of your voice is you. So getting them to be pushing the edges of their comfort zones, being vulnerable in front of each other, group singing is fantastic for that. It's also a great way to show leadership. If you've got a group that involves people who in every other scenario is boss and team, boss and staff, leadership group, an admin team, or whatever it might be, whatever hierarchies within the business, if they all sing together, that is a great way of the leaders of that group showing leadership, that they're prepared to become one of the group. They're prepared to show that vulnerability for everyone to be worth the same again. I did some singing workshops for a very large organisation last year where 20 people or so out of an office of 2,500 people sang together. They were from all different kinds of departments within that organisational structure. Under normal circumstances, they would hardly ever have crossed paths. They certainly wouldn't have known each other, but they sang together. And when you ask them what the benefit of that process was, whilst the music was great and it might have been a great switch off and stress reliever and anxiety buster on a lunchtime, one of the great things that they talked about was the productivity boost. How by spending that time together and getting to know each other on a really human and primal level, they started to worry less about hierarchy and organizational structure. So the next time that the finance department needed a favor from the HR department, because a representative of both those two departments now were used to singing together, they didn't worry about emailing up their manager to email their manager and up the hierarchical chain, and can you just pass this on to your department, get back to me, re this, because that's what emails say, re that, re this, re that, can you get back to me? They just picked up the phone, or they met on a lunchtime, or they had a coffee, and they spoke as humans. Because that was so-and-so from the alto department, so-and-so from the bass department, who sing together. And they now knew each other on a very deep level. They weren't great friends. They didn't all suddenly have to become best friends. But they, on this unspoken, unconscious level, knew each other as humans. They were used to coming together where all their voices were worth the same. All their voices had a shared goal. All their voices were used to connecting in that way. And so I think group singing is about way more than music. The music is the secondary thing. The music is the vehicle that is facilitating all of these other things. And in a business environment, that is a very powerful building and team building device for team building days, for conferences, for training days, for staff wellbeing days, to show how all of these things are possible when you push yourself out of your comfort zone. We can see great demonstrations of all of these human and business elements that you might not have thought of. You might have thought it was just about singing some songs. And it is that. But it's not that as the main thing. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd love you to give it a like. Put a comment below. Have you ever had a workplace choir in your environment, in your business? Have you ever come together and tried a community choir? Have you ever tried singing together in a group? You might have now started thinking about these things if you go to watch live concerts or go to watch live sport. What's it like? What's that feeling like, that intangible feeling like when you sing together as a group in these kind of settings? Stick around for more content on the connection between music and mental health and well-being and success. And I'll see you again very soon.